to introduce John Hooper, who's the Italy and Vatican City correspondent for The Economist. Been living in Florence for about 5 years, and before that, 15, 20 years in Rome. So he's a veteran and knows everything there is to know about what's going on in the corridors of power. And Morgan Fiumi, Florentine by birth, American by upbringing, Florentine by readoption, man about town, friend to many of us, who's going to chat to John about what's going on with the Meloni government, I think, more or less. Yeah, go for it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much to Simon, Sara, Lucia, all the staff here at the British Institute for offering such an extraordinary cultural program for the city. It's really such an asset for all of us and for the cultural landscape of the city. I'm very excited to be here whenever I get an opportunity to chat with John about what is going on in the world, and today we'll focus on Italy and Europe. And it's a wonderful opportunity to dig a little bit deeper and ask maybe more, hopefully, tricky questions to move beyond the headlines. Last time we met, which was several months ago, we started on sort of the European arena, transatlantic relations, and then we went down to Europe, and down to domestic. But I was reading some articles, and I found a very interesting article called "Why Right-Wing Italians Love Hobbits, Pirates, and Talking Seagulls." And I thought, this author must be mad. And since we have the author here today, why don't we start with the fantasy world today?
Thanks, Morgan. Yeah, it's very weird stuff. The Italian rights and far rights fascination with fantasy goes back to the 1970s, when The Lord of the Rings was first published in Italy. That is a story in itself, because it was translated by a Sicilian princess at the age of 16, all 3 volumes. The book appealed very much to what was then the youth movement of the neo-fascist party, which took it up. It has continued ever since and grown in the sense that other fantasy authors have been incorporated into the canon, not just Tolkien, but others, including, for example, the author of a Japanese anime series, whose hero, Captain Harlock, was sufficiently important to Giorgia Meloni for her to tweet on the 40th anniversary of his first appearance on Italian television. Then there is Michael Ende, the German writer, author of The Never-Ending Story. And his hero, Atreu, gave his name to the annual festival of the Brothers of Italy. As for seagulls that you mentioned, Jonathan Livingston Seagull is another favorite, and was actually adopted. The Seagulls was the name of the group within Brothers of Italy that Giorgia Meloni belonged to. So there's a long track record of this.
So many of the themes in this literature is about hierarchy and individuals responding to a greater calling. Is it a propaganda tool?
I think it may have become one. I think if you talk to people who were members of the party back in the 70s, they say that the reason then was that it was, Tolkien particularly, escapism. The 1970s were a pretty grim time if you were on the far right, because these were the years of lead, as they're called in Italian, the years in which the far left and far right were quite literally fighting it out in the streets, and sometimes with firearms. and that this provided them with a kind of way to get away from all of that. They also say that Tolkien had a particular meaning because the far right has always been divided in Italy into two wings. On one wing, you have very traditional Catholics, and on the other, people who are much more in the pagan tradition of writers like Julius Evola. And that Tolkien, which is this fantasy about another world in which there is no mention of priests, there's no mention of gods or God, could be read by, if you like, the pagans in one sense, but there was also awareness that Tolkien himself was a sincere Catholic and had actually said that the whole book is full of symbols that refer to Christianity. At the end, Frodo climbs a mountain to drop the ring into the volcano and save the world. I mean, it's pretty clear what the symbolism is there, and there are lots of others. So, I mean, that was, I think, the explanation for the center. The big question is, why on earth is it still important for people like Giorgia Meloni today? And they've spent a reported 250,000 euros on an exhibition about Tolkien, which is currently touring the country. And I think then you get into speculation. I mean, I think part of it is propaganda. I think that it helps, if you like, to soften the edges of the hard right. But I think actually a very interesting theory was put forward to me by somebody in Florence, which is that it provides an alternative code of values that has nothing to do with fascism. And that has always been the albatross around the neck of the hard or far right in Italy, that they were trying to revive the fascist party. Here was, as you say, a world of tradition, of honor, heroism, etc., that had nothing to do with either fascism or Nazism.
I imagine the appeal was probably broader when they were an opposition party, probably around 7-8%, rather than the majority party was around 25-26%.
Yeah, and I think that actually perplexes people. The professor of political science here at the University of Florence is a former member of the old MSI, the neo-fascist party. And when I was interviewing him, he said, it just beats me why on earth Meloni and co are so enamored of this stuff even today. It had a very special meaning for us, but they are no longer a minority. They are no longer being persecuted in the way that we thought that we were. And yet it's true that they carry forward this victimism, as it's called in Italian, vittimismo. There is still a very strong streak of that in the political discourse of the Brothers of Italy. We are these people who are on the margins. Well, they're not on the margins any longer. They're in power. And yet that is the discourse still.
Fantastic. So now, I don't know if anyone has seen the cover of The Economist this week. Basically has 3 women who are going to influence the fate of Europe. Obviously it's van der Leyen, Meloni, and Le Pen in France. So in the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, bloodiest conflict since World War II, a possible Trump victory and whatever repercussions that may have on the stability of NATO and the security for Europe, and a protectionist trend around the world that might impact many industries in Europe. These 3 women seem to be in a very critical position. And in the next 5 days, I would argue possibly Meloni is the most influential in that. Can you give us some context?
Yeah, no, I agree completely with your analysis that this would be a very bad time for Europe to be unstable. And yet there's a strong possibility that that's exactly what we're going to see, Europe in the sense of the EU. The situation is this, that the next European Parliament, by the way, I mean, I mention European elections, and I can see some people's brains, sort of fogging their eyes. My God, but this time this time they're really important for all the reasons that Morgan's just mentioned, and because they could lead to instability in the EU. The arithmetic is this: the next European Parliament will have 720 members. So Ursula von der Leyen, if it is going to be her, or whoever is going to be the next commissioner, needs to have the backing of 361 of those Euro deputies. Now, if you look at, for example, Politico's poll of polls, you'll see that they estimate that around about 389, 390 of those MEPs will belong to Ursula von der Leyen's current majority. So what's the problem? The problem is that it's a secret ballot, and these people cannot be counted upon to back up. A lot of them have got grudges to settle. A lot of them do not like the way that she's conducted business over the last few years and will rebel. Well, not that they don't even need to rebel, because there's no whipping in the European Parliament. And the estimate is that at least 10% will not vote for her this time round, leaving her short of votes. Where are those votes going to come from? Well, a very appealing solution might be to fish in the group known as European Conservatives and Reformists, which is headed by Giorgia Meloni, and in which the Brothers of Italy is the biggest single party. That said, she's being wooed from the other side by the other lady that you mentioned, Marine Le Pen, who was putting out very obvious feelers to Giorgia Meloni recently. And Giorgia Meloni has been very carefully playing both sides. So one moment she pops up at a rally organized by Vox in Madrid, at which Marine Le Pen is present, but she does so on a video link. So she's not actually present, but she is present. The next moment she puts out a statement on the anniversary of the assassination of Giacomo Matteotti, who was the opposition leader killed pretty much on orders from Mussolini. And she puts out a statement that comes as close as she's ever come to renouncing the fascist years. So she's going back and forth, keeping everybody guessing, which puts her in a very powerful position.
So is this a grand strategy or luck that she is now in such an influential position on one side, being wooed to create maybe the single pan-European right-wing party?
I think one has to say that a lot of it is luck, that the arithmetic has fallen out in this way. But having said that, she has positioned herself in this ambiguous area and has become a mistress at telling people what they want to hear. So she turns up one moment with Rishi Sunak and suddenly she's a Thatcherite. Then she comes back to Italy and passes a budget which has got lots of traces of what's called social fascism. So, tax cuts for the poor and what have you. So she's very, very good at keeping everybody guessing. The fascinating thing about these elections is that she may now be put, very likely will be put, in the position finally of choosing.
So what kind of concessions do you imagine her negotiating right now?
That's a fascinating question. At the European level, I think that what she is going to want is a looser Europe. So the trade-off may be that you get stability, but at the price of less integration. Because when you look at her slogan, the European elections, you know, that they want a different Europe, that Italy is going to change Europe. What she's talking about is what is sometimes called the Europe of the nations, or the Europe of the patriots, as she would say, an altogether looser arrangement in which only that which is essential gets done by the EU.
So what influence has she had so far at a European level? She's done multiple trips to Africa. There seems to be immigration. There's been a consensus around issuing common debt. How influential has she been?
I think that she's succeeded in making herself more acceptable than she was at the beginning, and particularly with Ursula von der Leyen identifying areas of common interest where they can work together, and immigration has been one of those. Not really because Italy has moved, but rather more that I think Europe has moved. Europe has become more resistant to illegal immigration, and that has played into Meloni's hands. It allowed her to go to Tunisia with Ursula von der Leyen and to hatch a deal, we don't know the details, whereby they would put a stop to the boats leaving Tunisia. At the same time, I think that she has managed to get across an idea that that Europe doesn't need to be racing towards integration at the same pace, while not going as far as people like Le Pen or Matteo Salvini, her coalition partner and the leader of the League.
And what about on the green initiatives? There seems to be disagreeing views on that.
Well, that's a weird one, because if you talk to people in Fratelli d'Italia, I mean, they will, many of them will tell you that, you know, we are ecologists. We are not deniers of climate change. What we don't like is a kind of ecology movement that does not put human beings at the center. We don't like mankind, humankind, being blamed for what's going on. Well, you're getting into quite a gray area. And I think that, for example, you have, again, you've got this ambiguity. There was a recent, very dramatic occasion on which a young woman got up and addressed the environment minister and said that she didn't feel like having children because she didn't want to bring children into a world that was going to be 2 degrees higher than at the moment. And it was sufficiently emotional address that, you know, there were tears welling up in his eyes. And he said, he talked about his sympathy with her position. And then just at the end said, but I reserve, I think he said something like, I reserve the privilege of doubt. So in other words, I'm with you, but am I? And again, this happens in so many areas with this government.
And what is the likelihood of Meloni striking a deal with the right, with Orban, and they seem to be having contrasting views on Ukraine, for example?
That is the big one. It's Russia really more than Ukraine. I mean, if you look at that there are 2 groups, essentially, although there are exceptions. One group, the Meloni group, tends to include those who do not support Russia, and the others in the other group which includes Le Pen and Salvini, includes parties that have a debt to Russia, which have received finance from the Kremlin in the past. And that makes it very difficult for politicians who otherwise actually have quite a lot in common to get together. But having said that, it's not inconceivable that if Meloni felt that she could not get what she needed from Le Pen, or if Le Pen were able to find the votes perhaps further to the left in the European Parliament, and a number of the left-wing parties, by the way, are saying, look, if you go with Meloni, you're not going to have our votes. That if she were in either of those two situations, that she might say, well, let's become the opposition. We'll be a powerful opposition together. And she would probably reflect on her own experience, which is what has propelled her into power. And she came electorally from nowhere, virtually, within the space of 4 years, was being the only main party or only party in Parliament that did not form part of Mario Draghi's government of national salvation. That was what made her popular. And so she might think, well, you know, a few years in the European Parliament in opposition, and suddenly the far right, the hard right, generally might be also propelled forward.
So can you just give us a little bit of background? There seems to be, or there is, the last, maybe since the financial crisis of 2008, the strong populist movement, as well as, I guess, identity questions. How is that affecting Europe, Italy, and how has she sort of harnessed that?
I think the identity issue is very strong, because you have this rock bottom birth rate and a sense that people are being replaced from outside, and that Italianness is a disappearing commodity, or might be. Now, with my experience, having been brought up in Britain, I find that is not a very satisfactory way of looking at things, because what I've seen is that as people are accepted into the culture, they become of that culture and they become indistinguishable in many ways from the native population. But having said that, Italy, which has a much shorter experience of immigration and which regarded itself actually historically wrongly as being up until quite recently a homogeneous nation, feels this very strongly. And I think that that is more than anything else what Brothers of Italy have managed to tap into. More so, I would say, than the economic problems of Italy after 2008.
So bringing down to the domestic landscape, the coalition government with the Lega, Forza Italia, and Fratelli d'Italia, the League has gone down in votes, and they seem to have migrated to Fratelli d'Italia. How can you describe, why has that happened? What are the factors there?
Yeah, I think actually you can even go further back. You started off with a strong Forza Italia under Silvio Berlusconi. If you look back to 2008, to the election, then they came in with a thumping majority. Well, not just Forza Italia and its allies had a decent majority in parliament, which Mr. Berlusconi then blew, not so much because of the famed Bunga Bunga parties, though they didn't exactly help, particularly with women voters, but because of his bizarre response to the 2008 events, the global financial crisis, where he just went into denial. So votes start to move away from him, and where do they go? They go to the League. Then you get 2000 and where are we? 18, 19, where Salvini, having received all these votes and riding high in the polls with over 30% of the Italian vote, almost unprecedented, blows it again by trying to actually bring down the government of which he is a part. I know I started this whole thing by saying bizarre stuff. This was also pretty bizarre stuff, actually slightly more bizarre maybe even than Tolkien. That he then, these votes then start to migrate again. I mean, they're basically the same votes. These are people who regard themselves as being on the right of center, conservative, and they want to vote for a right-wing party, and they then go off to Fratelli d'Italia, the Brothers of Italy. So there has been, so the situation you end up with, you could even go further back and see that the PD was in power from 2006 to 2008. You know, Italian voters have tried everything, and they've ended up with the Brothers of Italy. And that's partly through Giorgia Meloni's astuteness as a politician, but it's also partly the desperation, I think, of Italian voters to find a party that can govern the country efficiently. That said, I have to say there's a skeptical part of me that says it's also a hunt for a party that will somehow solve Italy's deep-seated economic problems without inflicting pain, and that is not possible.
So the shifting dynamics in the coalition is not ideology, it's rather loss of voter confidence.
No, I think actually what we've seen recently is the reassertion, very recently, reassertion of an ideological factor. The reaction by Salvini was to move his party even further to the right. So very much now aligned with Marine Le Pen. He's dropped his pro-Russian rhetoric, admittedly, but in every other respect, he's taking a very hard line. He has made a general who wrote a book that was so misogynistic and xenophobic that even Meloni's defense minister called it ravings. He has made this man the lead candidate for the League in, I think I'm right in saying, 4 out of the 6 constituencies in Italy. Don't take that as gospel, but he is there at the top of the list in a number of them. General Danacci. So he's moved to the right, and the interesting thing is that it doesn't seem to be working. In fact, it seems to be backfiring, because, surprise, surprise, the party that we thought that was going to fall apart after Silvio Berlusconi's death, Forza Italia, which more and more is projecting itself as a genuinely center-right option and not the populist party that it once was, is gaining in the polls. And I think what that might tell us is that Italians are not far-rightists, that the people on the right side of the political spectrum, their real views are not actually reflected in the current distribution of support that you see in the polls, and that people are gaining maybe cold feet about some of the things that Meloni is saying and doing.
Recently in the news, there's been coverage on this condono, this amnesty. And obviously, the international press has pointed out against, Italy's willingness to continually forgive mass illegal activities. Is this Meloni trying? Because it was the League that was really pushing this. Is this to appease part of the coalition?
I think it is a kind of an addiction. The public accounts are not in great shape, partly because, and this is not the fault of the current government, because of this insane super bonus, which was used as a way to revitalize the economy after the after the pandemic crisis. In case any of you don't know about the super bonus, basically what it does is it gives you, believe it or not, 110% of what you spend on any home improvement that is intended or purported to deliver a greater energy efficiency. It has a sort of built-in mechanism for fraud, because basically the higher the amount that your builder charges you, the more that you get back. So, you can see how a conversation then takes place between the builder and the person commissioning him or her, and a deal is struck. Now, this is currently forecast to leave a hole in the public accounts of 219 billion euros, which is a staggering amount of money. It's more than Italy is going to get in total from the EU's post-pandemic recovery fund. And Italy is getting by far more than anybody else. Now, so public accounts not looking great. Q, as always happens, an amnesty, whereby you can trot along to the city hall and say, I'm terribly sorry about what I did, and get, I was going to say eternal forgiveness, but it's not that. But actually pretty much is eternal forgiveness, because your planning or zoning sin, like throwing up an extension that nobody in their right mind would approve, that could be bought out. So I mean, and it is something that is a constant of Italian politics going back to the Second World War. When I was researching my book, the Italians, which by the way is available in any English language Florentine bookshop, at what I'm told is a ludicrous price. I looked up the number of amnesties. I mean, these are just the amnesties that let people out of prison, and there was one every 4 years of those, and it is in fact it was even, and I know this from having translated The Adventures of Pinocchio for Penguin Classics. That book is also, by the way, available. When I was doing the working on the notes with my co-translator for that, we were struck by the fact that Pinocchio is the beneficiary of an amnesty. He is locked up for something he never did, and then an amnesty comes round, and all the other crooks are let out of prison, and he has a big problem because he isn't a crook, and therefore he can't benefit from the amnesty. And so he has to actually go to the prison authorities and say to them, I am actually a criminal myself, and then they let him out.
What about the other cultural wars that have been going on? Appointment of obviously heads of media, RAI, and also the sanctioning or suing for defamation critics. of the government?
Yeah, that's something that I think really, politicians are free to sue people when they are just in opposition. But when they're in government, they have a different kind of power and really ought not to be taking out legal suits against journalists. But Meloni and Salvini both are pressing ahead with suits that they have against journalists. And one notable one against Roberto Saviano, which would certainly in a British court be thrown out immediately, because what he did was to call him a bastard and her a bitch on television. Stronzi is what he said. And that would be deemed common abuse in the British legal system, and it wouldn't get further than a magistrate's court. Now, that I would say is one, arguably the least pernicious aspect, but there has been this move towards putting supporters of the right into every conceivable post going in the cultural field. And the way that the people in Brothers of Italy see it is that, they were kept out in the cold for so many years. They were never allowed to express their opinions. This is their turn, and they're damn well going to take it and make sure that their views get across. But there should be limits to that in any decent democratic society in which you hear different views. And I think that the assault on the RAI, the public broadcaster, has gone beyond anything that we've seen in the past. I mean, let's say straight away, the RAI is not the BBC. The RAI is not PBS. It has always been a political football, but there have always been limits. In the old days, each of the main channels kind of belonged to a particular main party. They could put their people in. That system has gradually broken down over the years, but not even under Berlusconi was the RAI totally in the possession of one party. There was always Rai 3, which was leaning to the left. But what we've seen under Meloni is even moving in on Rai 3. Having said that, the pluralism of the media today, the fact that, so many young people are getting their news through TikTok and Instagram and what have you, makes me wonder just how effective this can be. But the intention is certainly there. And we don't know how far all of this is going to go, because it's not just in the field of the media. I mean, particularly in the area of the LGBT community, there have been two moves now, particularly a move to remove the non-biological mother from the birth certificate of a child in an arrangement where there are two mothers. And recently, Italy refused to sign a declaration against homophobia, saying that there were objections it had. It did not portray the naturalness of the traditional heterosexual family and that kind of thing. So we don't know how far this stuff's going to go, but it's gone already further than some people predicted.
Back to your question of the fundamental challenges in the Italian economy and reforms, whether they're judicial, economic, labor reforms. Do you think that there's going to be a political will and strength to tackle all those, mostly addressing the brain drain in Italy?
I think I don't see a clear commitment to tackling the structural problems of the Italian economy. It's not there in any great prominence in Brothers of Italy's electoral manifesto. The finance minister, who is a member of the League, Giorgetti, is looking increasingly isolated within the government. There's also an influence that comes from neo-fascist thinking, which is born of that wing of the fascist movement, which remained loyal to Mussolini's early ideas. Remember, Mussolini was a socialist at the beginning of his political career, and an element of socialism persisted all the way through with fascism, which tried to be inclusive. So it was national socialism, as in Germany. Now, there have been reflections of that. There is a definite feeling in some sections of the Brothers of Italy that they should continue on a path that is anti-free market and anti-liberal economics. I think much to the surprise of people up in the sort of industrial and financial elite of the North, I got a surprised reaction to some of the moves that have been made already. People saying, but aren't these people meant to be conservatives? Well, yes, but there are different kinds of conservatism, and Meloni represents a kind that had been half forgotten ever since Thatcher and Reagan came into power and projected a liberal form of economics into conservatism.
It appears that she's been maintaining ties to both the Biden administration, but also to the Trump administration. How do you see the outcomes of the U.S. election impacting, I guess, Italian politics and Meloni?
If Trump gets in, I think the answer to that is greatly. It'll be a different world. And I think that Trump 2 is not going to be Trump 1. His rhetoric is much more vengeful this time. It's much more authoritarian. We don't really know how much of that is going to carry over into a Trump administration. But the effect, I think, given the fact that you have this, let's be polite and call it pragmatic leadership at the moment of a conservative government. As I said at a previous meeting, the problem with pragmatists is that they are unpredictable. They will go with whatever suits them at that moment. And if Meloni sees the wind blowing in that direction, then I think that she will become a more hard right leader. There have already been those signs, as I mentioned, for example, turning up at the Vox rally, saying the other day, Marine Le Pen and I have a lot in common. I think that could be interpreted as preparing the way for the eventuality of a Trump administration in the United States.
Great. Well, we have a few more minutes, and I'd love to open it up for questions.
Sure. As always, the rules are simple. In the room, if you want to speak, put up your hand and I bring you the microphone so that people on the Zoom can hear. And Zoomers, I'll look at the chat. We can't actually see you tonight because we haven't got the screen up. But I'll look at the chat and read out on your behalf. And if you're brave and bold, you can unmute, just talk to us, and we'll hear a disembodied voice in the room. But we got someone in the room right here.
Thank you. Can I ask, how independent is the judiciary? And is there any sign of her moving on the judiciary?
I want to be careful how I answer that. Okay. there has been a move on the judiciary. There is a judicial reform bill that looks as though it's going to be passed by Parliament, and which introduces an absolute separation of the careers of prosecutor and judge. Now, a lot of people have been screaming about this, particularly prosecutors and judges, saying that this is wrong-headed. It's a difficult one, frankly, to persuade any Anglo-Saxon, if I can put it that way, of the British and American legal systems and Australian have a very clear separation of careers, and I find it quite unhealthy that you have people who can be prosecuting one moment and then judging soon afterwards and then going back being prosecutors. It creates a sense of a corporate sense that is, I think, unhealthy. And so I've always myself been a supporter of those reforms, and they were promoted very much under the Berlusconi government, even at a time when The Economist was not exactly being kind to Silvio Berlusconi. Now, the other part of this is that the judiciary, which I think, like all judiciaries, is subject to some influence, withstood the tests of the past. You know, it's now being forgotten because Berlusconi managed to create this image of himself as the granddad of the nation in his later years. But, you know, in his populist days, he was moving strongly to do things that you should not be doing in any democracy, like passing bills that say that, you know, it's a crime unless it's done by Berlusconi. Right? That was one of the bills. And the judiciary, and I think this is true of a lot of several of the Italian institutions, withstood that battering. That's a very encouraging aspect of Italian democracy, that there are these built-in checks and balances, and I think a sense among Italians of what a democracy really should look like. And so in that sense, I'm very hopeful and that if it's put to other tests, it will be able to withstand them.
We've got one on the Zoom here from our friend Edward Cheney, who says, in the light of the relative success of Italy in representing Il Popolo, do you think the country with the least choice in the Western world in the coming elections, i.e. the UK, should abandon or qualify its first past the post system?
Well, I'm not an expert on British politics. As you know, Simon, I'm actually half British and half Irish. So we have a different system in Ireland. So I don't think I want to get involved in arguing over that one. I think that what you may well see over the next few years, if there is a Labour government, it looks very much as if there will be a Labour government in Britain, is a gradual rethink of the decision to leave the EU. Whether that will lead to a rethink of first past the post, I think is actually quite unlikely.
First, a reflection, listening to you describing Meloni, how she's has Le Pen on one side and von der Leyen on the other side. This seems so similar to how Mussolini played the Germans against Churchill, Hitler against Churchill, and not until late did he decide he made the wrong choice. And of course, Meloni must be aware that he made a very bad choice. So that could be reassuring. But I also have a question that hasn't been addressed. How well are you described how the voters basically move in blocks. You know, that we don't like this ant hill, let's go to build another. So my question is, how well is politics run in Italy? Do you have focus groups? Do people, you know, like micro-targeting like they do in the US? Or is it, you know, more, it's not like modern politics, which might be a good idea, actually. But I'm just wondering, how well are the parties run?
Good question. Let me just first of all say thank you very much for that comment, historical comment, very interesting. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. But on the business of how well politics is run, I would say in a much less sophisticated manner than in many other countries. One of the things I noticed particularly is the lack of think tanks attached to parties, so that policies can often be pulled out of a drawer at short notice and announced and implemented, policies that no serious consideration would have allowed to pass. And the classic example of that is the superbonus. The five-star movement, you know, again, a bit like the Brothers of Italy, came from nowhere in a matter of years, didn't have any time to develop that kind of, how can I put it, intellectual infrastructure. And then somebody or other had this bright idea, why don't we give these 110% subsidies to people? And somebody or other said, oh, that's great, that's, you know, that'll really dynamize the construction industry, which it has, by the way. I mean, it's grown by a third since this measure was introduced. But, you know, no one in something like Conservative Central Office in Britain, in their right mind, and unless given something very powerful to smoke, would approve of that. Now, and that is also very much true of Brothers of Italy, because again, they came from nowhere. The only think tank that is really associated with them, and it's not integrated even into the party, is one that I'm familiar with. And I mean, it really is, I was going to say one man and a dog, but it's about three people and a cat. And therefore there is this constant risk of a measure being announced that is not really very sensible. And we saw an example of this actually back last summer, where at a late night press conference, it was suddenly sprung on the political reporters that they were going to bring in a windfall tax for the banks on the profits that they made from inflation. Now, in Spain, exactly the same measure was introduced, but after proper consideration, after it had been discussed with the Bank of Spain, after it had been discussed privately with the bank, etc., etc. Instead of which, here it comes in overnight. Bank of Italy hadn't even been consulted about this measure, and it had to be withdrawn a couple of weeks later. So yeah, I think that there's a gap there. There's a whole culture that needs to be developed.
Very nice lecture, John. What do you think about the right sort of shift that's happening throughout the world? You mentioned Le Pen and Meloni sort of moving to the right, but if you have a Trump presidency who will withdraw support in many, many ways, become a really nationalist kind of guy, cut off funding for many, many things. How do you see this sort of right-wing movement coalescing or helping to deflect any further incurrence from Russia and what is happening in that area?
I think there's a real risk that they won't. Many people on the far or hard right either overtly or covertly admire Putin, admire the, the strong hand, the mano dura, as it's called in Italian. And on the origins, I mean, I think that these parties arise when there is a profound sense of insecurity in society. I think that you can, and actually, I owe this insight to you from, you may even not remember having said this, but at a dinner party some years ago, where you traced back the origins of Trumpism to 9/11, that this was such a shattering experience, such a violation of America's sense of security and sense of integrity, that it had this long-lasting gradual effect of building up a very hard right. I think for the rest of the world, you look at 2008, which shook people's belief in the way in which the economy was being, the world economy was being run. I mean, all of a sudden, there was a moment during that crisis in which there was a genuine belief that capitalism was about to collapse. And I think that that also shook people to the core. Then you get a pandemic after that. And again, you're stepping out even further the sense of vulnerability of people. So I think it's kind of not surprising that they then want to turn to people who seem to promise them security and certainty.
John Morgan, thank you. John, I just wanted to get your perspective on demographics, because it strikes me in Europe that most politicians are afraid to address this issue. And if you look at Italy, the population shrank last year. This is decades in the making. Changing a birth rate is decades in the making. You have a right-leaning government where obviously anti-immigration is sort of very popular. But from an economic and fiscal perspective, long term, the aging population is a massive challenge. At the heart of government, is there any intelligent debate around that sort of challenge?
Yes, there is. And this is an area where I give credit to Brothers of Italy. I mean, they have grasped the problem. It was put #1 on their electoral manifesto. Whatever you may think about the remedies that they proposed, they grasped the issue. And one of the hardest cardliners in this government, well, that's certainly his reputation, the agriculture minister, Lollobrigida, came out some months ago and said something that no Italian politician of any substance has said, or any rank, if you like, has said over the last 20 years, which is we need immigration. Now, he then went on to say we don't need this immigration, pointing to all the boats coming in on the southern shores. But what we're going to do is we're going to increase very substantially the number of legal immigrants allowed in. Now, that is still nowhere near enough to satisfy the labor market, because the problem of Italy at the moment is that there are lots of jobs which are available but which are not being filled. So that is an area where they have thought things through, and it may be one of these cases, I think, like, they always say that labor reform can only really be done by socialists. And that's what you saw, for example, in Germany at the turn of the century, where the Schröder governments were able to bring in labor reforms that frankly would have had the trade unions crawling the walls and calling general strikes had they been proposed by Christian Democrats. And I think in this case, one of the services that Brothers of Italy have done is to bring that issue out into the open and be frank about it in a way that perhaps the left just cannot be.
John, I'm going to indulge and give myself a question before one more from the chat. We all know that since the new republic was formed after the last war, the average length of an Italian government is about a year to 18 months. How stable is the current government?
I think that it, for the moment, looks stable. It has a substantial majority in Parliament. There is no reason why you might think it should not see out the legislature, which Meloni says repeatedly. My only caveat would be that sometimes Italian politics are illogical, and that sometimes, and he's proven this in the past, Matteo Salvini can be illogical, as when he tried to bring down his own government, and that he might actually do that again, particularly if he suffered a crushing defeat at the elections that are going to start on Saturday. If the League were really, really humiliated, then I think he would be perhaps facing the abyss. He'd be facing being thrown out as leader of his own party, and he might think that bringing down the entire House of Cards was a better option for him. So with that caveat, I would say this is a government, if I had to put a probability on it, I probably would say 70-30 that it's going to see out its term.
Sure. Bernadette Delaney has asked the question, how do you think Meloni will pursue her idea of premierato?
Very good question. That is the one that really, I think, concerns me more than actually the culture wars for the moment, which is a grab for power. The premierato, by the way, just for those of you who have not been following this, is an attempt by the government to bring in a directly elected prime minister. This is a system that has been tried in other countries with disastrous results. Right? It is, we were talking about illogical things. This is not a great idea. Israel brought in a system like this, and it made the country unworkable, and they dropped it after a few years. The only logic to it is that Meloni is seeking what her coalition partner Matteo Salvini once called pieni poteri, full powers, because not only would it mean that the powers of the prime minister were greater, but those of the president, who has been a really valuable check on all kinds of abuses over the decades. There's never been a her, powers would be severely restricted. That, I think, would be a very retrograde step for Italian democracy.
That could be a good note to end on, unless anyone else is desperate to contribute. No? Well, it remains for me to thank very much Morgan and John. Thank you. We'll see you all next time.